So this is just a quick disclaimer that the information contained in this presentation is not a substitute for a medical consultation, and a physician should always be consulted for any health problems or medical conditions. So today's agenda, we're going to do a Project Echo series overview, introductions, the actual presentation, a case study, and then we can do questions and answers at the end. So a little bit about Project Echo. Project Echo is a movement to demonopolize knowledge and amplify local capacity to provide best practice care for underserved people all over the world. The Echo model is committed to addressing the needs of the most vulnerable populations by equipping communities with the right knowledge at the right place at the right time. For more information, you can visit echo.unm.edu. So now we have our speakers. We have Brianna Jeffries. Brianna Jeffries is a board certified and licensed genetic counselor. She received her Master's of Medical Science in Human Genetics and Genetic Counseling from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia in May of 2018. After graduation, Brianna worked as a genetic counselor for the Rutgers Cancer Institute from 2018 to 2025. Her primary role there involved evaluating individuals for hereditary risk factors associated with an increased chance of developing cancer. She also assisted numerous individuals in being able to use their genetic information to either reduce their chances of developing cancer or catch cancers at earlier, more treatable stages. Brianna is passionate about cancer prevention as well as ensuring that all individuals have fair access to genetic testing and counseling services when indicated. I also do want to note that Brianna actually pre-recorded everything, so at the end she'll have her contact information for questions. And then our case study will be Evelyn Fuertes. Evelyn Fuertes is a registered nutrition and dietitian technician. She is a bilingual community outreach coordinator for education for the Rutgers Cancer Institute / ScreenNJ. After almost 20 years of working for corporations in New York City, Evelyn decided to make a change and devote her work to the community, where her efforts can make a difference. In 2014, Evelyn earned her nutrition and dietetic technician registered credential, enabling her to teach and create evidence-based nutrition curriculums. Since 2014, she has held roles at Community Food Bank of New Jersey, SNAP Ed, and Whole Cities Foundation, a Whole Foods nonprofit focusing on food insecurity. Evelyn joined the Cancer Institute in 2019 as a community cancer control specialist. Now, as a coordinator, she works with her team to increase cancer awareness, prevention, and screening, focusing on under-resourced communities. Her goal is to empower people to advocate for their health. So we're going to do cancer genetics and genetic counseling. I believe we have a pretest after this, so this is kind of a benchmark just to see what you know before the presentation. Oh, maybe it's after this. So this is the pretest. It'll show up on your screen if you want to take a moment to answer the 3 questions. They're all true or false questions, and we'll go over this at the end. Okay, I think, yeah. Okay, so I'll end the poll and we'll review it after. And so now I'm going to let Brianna take
So,
it
as an
away.
outline for today's talk, we are going to discuss an introduction to cancer genetics, talk about the importance of knowing your familial cancer history, discuss what you can expect from a cancer genetic counseling appointment, review the process of genetic testing as well as potential costs, and then conclude by going through some important resources. In terms of how much cancer is hereditary, we know that the vast majority of cancers in the population are actually sporadic or not hereditary. These cancers happen due to DNA changes, or what we call somatic mutations, that happen later in life after an individual is already born. Those somatic genetic changes are often triggered by certain environmental exposures, or they can also just happen completely randomly as we age. The second most common category of cancers are familial cancers. These are cancers that cluster together in families. So in these families, you might see more individuals with cancer than you would expect to see in the average family, but it is not due to one single gene. In these families, it's oftentimes due to shared factors between the family members, which could include environmental factors, diet, lifestyle, or genetic factors as well. The least common type of cancer is hereditary cancer, and these cancers are caused by inherited gene changes or mutations that are passed from parents to their children, oftentimes putting people at an increased risk of developing certain types of cancer. So, what makes us unique as humans? We know that all humans in the body, we have millions of cells. And inside each of our cells, we have genetic information packaged in the form of chromosomes. Most biological humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, so we essentially get 23 chromosomes from our mother and 23 chromosomes from our father. That also means that we get 50% of our DNA from our mother and the other 50% from our father. And then within each chromosome, we have various different genes. And these genes are essentially our body's DNA or instruction manual. So these genes tell our bodies how to live and grow and be healthy. When it comes to hereditary cancer genes, we all inherit various genes from our parents that are supposed to protect us from developing various types of cancers. Some people inherit non-working copies of these genes due to inherited genetic mutations. So these mutations essentially cause the genes to not work how they should. And so if you have a gene that's supposed to protect you from developing various types of cancers and that gene is not working, then you could be born with less protection against cancer than the average person. And that may also mean that you're born at a higher risk of developing certain types of cancers. So one example of this are the BRCA1 and the BRCA2 genes, which are the most common genes that we know of that can cause hereditary breast cancer in families. So if we look at the various different types of cancers that we can see with these genes, and we compare the risk of individuals in the general population. So these are individuals who do not carry any sort of genetic mutation or abnormality, to individuals who are positive either for a BRCA1 gene mutation or a BRCA2 gene mutation. What you can see is that in the general population, the average female has a 12% chance of developing breast cancer in her life. But with BRCA1 or BRCA2, that risk could be as high as a 72% chance. It's actually a little bit higher with BRCA1 than BRCA2. The risk of a second breast cancer within 20 years of the diagnosis of the first breast cancer is also significantly increased in gene mutation carriers. For females, the risk of ovarian cancer is significantly increased, so up to a 58% risk of developing ovarian cancer in the lifetime. We also know that males that carry a BRCA1 or 2 gene mutation are at an increased risk of developing breast cancer. So up to 7% of men that are positive for the BRCA2 gene specifically will develop breast cancer by the age of 70. The risk for prostate cancer is also elevated in both BRCA1 and BRCA2, but it's more significantly elevated with BRCA2. And then the risk for pancreatic cancer is also elevated in these gene mutation carriers, again, most significantly with BRCA2. So you can see that these individuals are born at a significantly increased risk of developing these different cancer types. Most cancer-related genes are inherited in a dominant way, which means that, again, we have two copies of every gene in our body, one from our mother and one from our father. And this diagram on the slide, the black gene is supposed to be the non-functioning cancer gene. So that's the gene with the genetic mutation. I'm sorry, my apologies. The gray gene on the slide is the gene with the genetic mutation. The black gene is the normal gene. So in this scenario, the mother is positive for a genetic mutation. So one of her two copies is mutated, which is shown in the light gray. And every time she has a child, she's either going to pass down the light gray gene with the mutation or the black gene without the mutation. And so there's a 50% chance every time this mother has a child that she's going to pass down the mutated copy of that gene to her child. And both males and females can carry these genes, both males and females can pass down these genes, and both males and females can inherit these genes as well. Okay, so how do you know if genetic testing is something that you should consider? The first thing to do is to explore your family history of cancer. In terms of which relatives are most important to learn about, typically a good rule of thumb is the more closely related an individual is to you, the more DNA you share with that person. So we share most DNA with our first degree relatives. We share about 50% of our DNA with them. These are our parents, our full siblings that have the same mother and father as us, as well as our children. Second degree relatives are typically any half siblings. So if you have a sibling that has the same mother but a different dad, for example, aunts or uncles, nieces and nephews, as well as our grandparents. And then third degree relatives are our cousins, so the children of our aunts and uncles, our great aunts and uncles, and great grandparents. So all of those relatives are important when it comes to collecting your family history. When you collect your family history, it's important to document who in your family has had cancer, the types of cancer that they had, and then also how old they were when they were diagnosed, which I'll talk about on the next slide. The Surgeon General has a great online tool that's useful for collecting and documenting your family history. So what are some red flags for hereditary cancer in families? Anytime that you see that there are multiple cases of cancer in the family, especially if they're all on the same side, so mom's side versus dad's side. Any times that you see related cancers occurring together in a family, especially on the same side. So we know that some genes, for example, like the BRCA genes that we talked about a few minutes ago, can predispose individuals to multiple different types of cancer. So not just breast, but also ovarian, pancreatic, prostate, etc. And so if you see that spectrum of cancers occurring together on one side of the family, that can be a red flag. Any young diagnosis, so anyone in the family who's had cancer before the age of 50 is suspicious for a genetic cause. We know that the risk of cancer in the general population increases as individuals age, but it's not common for someone to develop a cancer when they're in their 20s or their 30s or their 40s, and that could be an indication that that person was born at an elevated risk of getting cancer. If you have family members who have developed rare types of cancers that we don't see in the general population that often, so these are things like triple negative breast cancers, ovarian, pancreatic, etc. If you have any family members who have developed multiple types of cancer in their life, so for example, Aunt Mary had breast cancer and then several years later got ovarian cancer, that's also a red flag. And then certain ancestries are suspicious as well. So there are some common mutations in certain populations. For example, the Eastern European or Ashkenazi Jewish population is much more likely to be positive for mutations in genes like BRCA1 and 2. And so that may also be a potential reason to consider genetic testing. So this is an example of a hereditary cancer family. And the chart here that you see here on the slide is called a pedigree. We typically use circles to represent biological females in the family and squares to represent males. And then each line that you see is essentially a different generation. So the patient is the person with the arrow pointing towards them. She was diagnosed with breast cancer under the age of 50, so she was 38 at diagnosis. If we look at her father's side of the family, her father has a sister who developed breast cancer at the age of 44, as well as another sister who had ovarian cancer in her 50s. So even though that diagnosis was over the age of 50, because ovarian cancer is rare, that's still a red flag. And then if we go up another generation, you can see that her dad's mom actually had breast cancer twice. So her first diagnosis was at 42, the second diagnosis was at 61. So in this family, we're seeing that there are multiple relatives affected by cancer, multiple generations, several relatives diagnosed under 50. So this family is definitely strongly suggestive of a hereditary predisposition to cancer. So if you were to undergo a genetic counseling appointment, you can expect for the genetic counselor to collect a detailed medical and family history. He or she will use the information that is collected from you to do a risk assessment. So she'll be telling you how likely it is that they think that you're positive for a genetic mutation based on what they're seeing in your medical or family history. The genetic counselor will discuss various different genetic concepts with you. So what are genes? What does it mean to have a genetic mutation? How are these genes inherited in families? They will talk about the cancer risk associated with the various genes that they are offering you genetic testing for. They will review your options for genetic testing. So there are a lot of different options in terms of how many genes to test for and what information you can get back from doing a genetic test. They will discuss the pros and cons of genetic testing, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. Review your different management options. So if you are positive for a genetic mutation, what are we going to do about that? And then ultimately, if you decide that genetic testing is something that you want to move forward with, typically you will submit a sample for testing as well as informed consent. So there are many pros and cons of genetic testing. One of the advantages is that it can allow for increased cancer surveillance. So if we know what type of cancer someone is most at risk for, then we can screen them for that cancer more often than we would in the average person. It may allow for certain risk-reducing options. So there are some medications as well as surgeries that we can utilize to reduce individuals' risk of developing certain types of cancers. It may clarify the risk to your children and your other relatives. So again, if you are positive for a genetic mutation, there would be a 50% chance that any of your first-degree relatives would have that mutation as well. It may decrease some anxiety by providing you with a sense of understanding. So some people are curious to know why they got cancer or why someone in their family got cancer. And then nowadays we have a lot of genetically targeted therapy and treatment options. So even if you already have cancer, if we can determine the gene that actually caused it, that might make you eligible for additional therapies. At the same time, it's not all rainbows and sunshine, so there are some possible disadvantages or cons of undergoing genetic testing that we encourage patients to think about. One of which is that we may not be able to reduce your risk of developing cancer to 0%. So even if we know that you're at risk, there may not be anything that we can do to actually reduce your chance, especially not to 0. Certain cancers may be hard to screen for. There can also be emotional concerns. So some people, if they know that they're at an increased risk of developing cancer, that may come with anxiety. Also, if they know that there's a chance that they may have already passed this down to their children, their parents can feel guilty about that information or angry. This can cause strained familial relationships in some scenarios. And there's also a potential fear for insurance discrimination, which I'll talk about on the next slide. The Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act is a federal law that was passed back in 2008. This law is meant to protect individuals against discrimination, either from their employers or their health insurance companies based on genetic test results. So genetic information cannot be used in hiring, firing, advancement, or compensation decisions by employers. Genetic information also cannot be used in coverage or eligibility decisions by health insurance companies. It is important to keep in mind that from an insurance standpoint, GINA does not extend to life insurance, disability insurance, or long-term care insurance. So those particular insurances do have more leeway to use genetic information as they make coverage decisions and could potentially deny an individual coverage based on their genetic test results. GINA also, the employment protection does not extend to the military. So if you are someone who is in the military, it is important to keep in mind that the military can potentially make hiring and firing decisions based on genetic test results. So what is the process? Typically, patients either submit a blood or saliva sample. Many people ask, is one more accurate than the other? And the simple answer is no, that you can get DNA both from blood and saliva. However, DNA can be potentially more difficult to extract from saliva, especially in those who are undergoing chemotherapy. Most labs typically verify insurance coverage once the order is placed by the medical provider or once the sample is received, and patients are typically informed about their expected out-of-pocket cost upfront. If the out-of-pocket price is higher than a patient would like to pay, they do typically have the option to cancel all the way up until the point that the result is reported to their provider. And they may also be given the option to self-pay. So rather than going through their insurance company, they can pay the lab directly. There are labs that have a self-pay price as cheap as $250, which for complicated reasons can sometimes be cheaper than going through an insurance company. So what if you don't have insurance? Again, there are cash pay options as cheap as $250 at some labs. There are also financial assistance programs. So most laboratories have programs to offer free or reduced cost genetic testing to individuals who either don't have insurance or who are underinsured. So maybe they have insurance, but their insurance is not going to cover the cost of their testing. Typically, income requirements apply, so you have to be below a certain income level to qualify for programs like this, but they do exist. When we say a genetic mutation, I want to explain exactly what we mean by that. So essentially, these labs are reading through your genes or reading through your DNA, very similar to reading a word or a sentence, and they are checking to see how your genes are spelled in your body compared to how they expect them to be spelled in the average person. So a good example is shown here on the slide. The normal sequence for this particular gene is TAACT, and as you can see in this person on the bottom, their gene sequence is TAACC rather than CT. So that single letter difference can be a genetic mutation that can cause that gene to not work correctly. So ultimately, if you undergo genetic testing, you eventually will get a result back, and your genetic counselor can be really helpful in helping to explain the result and what it means for you and your family. They can review your different medical management options with you and coordinate your care. So if there are certain specialists that you need to see for cancer screening or prevention, they can place referrals to those specialists for you. They can also discuss the relevance of the result to your family and how your family members can go about being testing if interested, and then connect you with various different support resources. This is an example report shown on the right side of the screen where this patient tested positive for a pathogenic or disease-causing variant or mutation in the BRCA2 or BRCA2 gene. I'm not going to go over this report in detail, but this report tells you where specifically in the gene the lab found the genetic change or mutation, as well as what the significance of that change is for the patient and their family. So lastly, I just want to review some genetic counseling and testing resources with you all. We offer genetic counseling for hereditary cancer at the Morris Cancer Center. which is located in New Brunswick, and the address is shown here on the slide. We have several genetic counselors. Our phone number and fax number, as well as our website, are shown here on the slide. It is important to keep in mind that we do not require a physician referral. So if you feel that you would like to undergo genetic counseling based on your personal or familial history of cancer, you can simply call our number and request a visit. We also do not currently bill for genetic counseling visits. So as of current, this is a complimentary service that we offer within our clinic. If you do choose to undergo genetic testing, this is typically billed to your insurance, and the genetic counselor that you meet with can discuss any potential cost with you before you actually submit a sample. If you or your relatives do not live in New Jersey, the National Society of Genetic Counselors, or NSGC, actually has a Find a Genetic Counselor website that I refer people to all the time. On this website, you can actually start off by selecting the type of genetic counselor that you're looking for, whether that be in person or through telehealth. And then you can also input your zip code, and if there's a particular specialty that you're looking for, like a cancer genetic counselor versus prenatal or cardiac or whatever it may be. And then the website will actually generate a list of genetic counselors close to wherever you reside, along with contact information. Force, or Facing Our Risk for Cancer Empowered, is another support resource, especially for patients that are positive for genetic mutations. This is their website. I would encourage you to read about it. They do have information available on their website, both in English and Spanish. They have a peer navigation program, so if you are positive for a particular genetic mutation and you don't know much about it, they can actually connect you with another person who's similar to your age, maybe has a similar diagnosis to you, that can walk you through what their experiences have been. They also have a lot of sub-support groups, which are shown here on the slide. They host different educational conferences, and they also are a great resource for research studies. So thank you for allowing me the time to speak with you all today. If you have any additional questions, you can always contact the genetics department at the Morris Cancer Center through email, which is hope_program@cinj.rutgers.edu. And I also included our contact information on a previous slide. Thank you.
Thanks to Brianna. Unfortunately, she is not here with us. So we were able to get the recording, but we thank her for that session. So now we'll go into the case study. So genetic testing when you don't know your risk. And this is actually going to be my story about my experience with genetic testing. But first, we want to know what you think of when you hear the word genetic testing. And you should have you should have the link in the chat. Unfortunately, I can't see anything. So hopefully you have the link in the chat, or you can go to mentimeter.com with the code 89520811. And we'll give everybody a few minutes to join. So prevention, awesome. Taking a piece of my DNA, empowered, because you're empowered to make your decisions. Family history. Hereditary, prevention, DNA, empowered. Family history seems to be a popular one. Informed, risk. You guys are going so fast. Scared. Yeah, it's scary. It's scary. Anxiety, lots of anxiety. Yeah, because you don't know, it could be life-changing. Okay. So let's Oh, I think people are still putting in there. I got 13 out of 15, so I think we're in pretty good shape. But I think these are all really, really valid um, reactions when you think of genetic testing. They really are. Okay. So why genetic testing? Um, my mom died in 2010, and we really didn't know what was happening. Unfortunately, she passed before they could really do exploratory surgery, and my family didn't want to do an autopsy. So fast forward, I'm working at the Cancer Institute and I'm casually talking to an oncology nurse and mentioned how, what happened to my mom, her symptoms, that sort of thing. And she looks at me and she's like, that really sounds like ovarian cancer. Now, she didn't have any markers. And I mentioned that, and I was told that that doesn't necessarily come up in blood work. So another couple years go by, and I'm having a conversation with my gynecologist, and he says the same thing. He says, that really sounds like the first time I mentioned to him, I was a little younger, and I felt like he kind of blew it off. But then as I got older, mentioned it again, and then that's when he kind of had that same look and said, that kind of sounds like ovarian cancer. You might want to get genetic testing. So that's kind of what started uh, those wheels turning in my head that maybe it's something that I wanted to look into. Now, working at the Cancer Institute, having more information, being aware of like what genetic testing can look into and what it can do. So, do you think you'd want to know your genetic risk for cancer? Like it's one of those like, do is ignorance bliss? Maybe it's better not to know. It's a risk. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. So it is an interesting and a hard decision sometimes to make. And it's not a decision to make lightly. So right now, we have a lot of yeses. And there's a part of me that wonders because of what we do, if we are more inclined to be on the yes. Because, when I wasn't working in cancer, this was, if you noticed in my bio, I had the career change in 2014. This happened in 2010, so I didn't have like all of the information and the confidence with cancer that I do now. So, it's interesting of all of our yeses are because of what we do and how we're a little more aware. So overwhelmingly, we have yes, people would like to know. So I know that Brianna talked about the process. So I'll also talk about the process. So making the appointment. That's really probably the hardest part of this whole process because you have to decide. Do I really want to talk to anyone? Do I want to share any of this information? This is very personal. What will happen? Will I be discriminated against? There's so many things going on in your head that it really is the hardest part. But as I got older, I figured, you know what? let me just do this, and I'll deal with whatever happens as it happens. So then you make the call, you make the appointment. So pick up the phone, call the Cancer Institute because I went through the Life Center. And then they set you up an appointment to go with your genetic counselor. My counselor happened to be Brianna. So she went over my family history. Now, I really don't have my family history. So I had basically zero information. I don't know anything about grandparents in that sense of, yes, I know certain things, but beyond that, cousins, I don't know a lot of my family, so I don't have that information. And because of that, Brianna was very clear that since there was no cancer diagnosis, in my first degree relatives or anybody else that I could think of, um, that insurance probably would not cover my testing. And that did end up being the case. So I did have to pay out of pocket. But it was what she said, it was the $250. And for me, the cost was worth it because for me it was peace of mind. So we talked for about 30 minutes, went over the family histories, my concerns, and probed as to why I wanted to get the testing. So that also is part of the conversation. In addition, especially because I did not have family history. So it's finding out why you really want that. Is it right for you? And then what happens if they do find cancer. So she was very clear also, if things are found, there are options. Some of them are scary. Some of them might be preventative surgery. We've all heard of people getting prophylactic surgeries because they have the BRCA gene. So those are kind of the options that they discuss. And then you take the test. So the test is super easy. I actually found, I think you guys can see it. I'm sorry, I can't see myself. Um, I found the package insert from the test I took. So this was a simple saliva test, and basically it came with everything. It came with the self-addressed FedEx label, everything. So you can't eat, drink, chew gum. You can't have anything in your mouth for 30 minutes before the test. And then once you do that, you label your tube, you put it in the box, you mail it out, and then you just wait for the results. So then when you get the results, or when they get the results, then someone will call you and let you know, and either set up an appointment to speak or let you know right then and there if you are available. So now our first question was why, would you want to know? And so now we want to know why or why not. So why or why not would you want to, do you think you'd want to know your genetic risk for cancer? If yes, then there are options. Yeah. You can prepare. You can mentally prepare, physically prepare for the future generations of the family. Yeah, for my children. Yep, that's a big one. Be better informed for myself and for my family. hmm Information is power. I would want to know so that I could be proactive for my own health by at least being more aware. I also would want the information to share with my family. Yes, to make informed decisions. I want my children to know their family history so that I can take steps to lead a healthier life, be able to get better care if possible. And I'm not sure, what if I can't do anything to reduce my risk? And that is a huge one. I was wondering if anybody who didn't, I know we didn't have any no's, but I was hoping someone who would put in like why they wouldn't want to do it. So I can make decisions related to cancer treatment and to share with my family potential risk. If diagnosed, receive early treatment to prevent metastasis. And these are all wonderful reasons. You know, your why or why not is very personal, and there's no wrong answer. There really isn't. And I really resonate with the I'm not sure. What if I can't do anything to reduce my risk? That's a big one. So now for my results were kind of interesting because if you noticed in Brianna's presentation about like the simple saliva test, um, mine did not have enough DNA to do all of the tests. So there was one marker that they had a hard time differentiating between that gene and another very close gene. So I was actually asked to do another test. So instead of a saliva test, we actually did a blood test. And this was at no additional charge. And basically, since I live close to the Cancer Institute, I was able to go there, or rather go to the lab there and do the genetic testing. But if I lived anywhere else that I lived, I would have been able to do it whatever was convenient for me. So as far as my results, everything came out all clear. So yay. It still doesn't reduce cancer risk. I just want to make that clear, and that she said it in the presentation as well. Just because your genetic testing is all clear doesn't mean that you're still not at risk for cancer. And one thing that they did note is that because, you know, we are constantly researching and new genes come up, and, you know, this is an ongoing, evolving process. If I had any markers for something that comes up in the future, then I would be notified. So let's say they discover something in 5 or 6 years that I do have a genetic mutation for, then they're supposed to notify me and let me know that I have this genetic mutation. So it's also not just that moment in time, but it could also be helpful in the future as we gain more knowledge about those uh, genetic genetic mutations that cause cancer. You know, Dr. Tara Matisse here at the Rutgers Genetics Department, she's currently working on a study where she's gathering saliva samples. I believe their goal is for 10,000 recruits, and they're basically looking for more genetic markers for breast cancer. So there's constant research going on to find more markers, and as we find those, we'll be notified if we have those markers. So the final question we have for you today is, what concerns do you have before genetic testing? So I know, you know, my concern was basically, what if there's something there? You know, whether I'm very predisposed to a certain cancer. Yeah. And which cancer, and then what would be, you know, for BRCA 1 and 2, right? A lot of people get mastectomies, they take out their ovaries. For I think it's P53 for Lynch syndrome. For Lynch syndrome, there's, you know, there's colorectal cancer, breast cancer, gynecological cancers. There's a lot of cancers related to Lynch syndrome. So that one also is, you know, it's kind of scary. Insurance issues, absolutely. You know, they say they don't discriminate, but do they really? Finding out I'm a carrier of a deadly disease, this could be really difficult, especially if you have children already. You know, if you don't have kids, you can kind of make that decision. But if you already have children, that can be really, really difficult. Understanding the information and obtaining proper post-test counseling, yes. So when the results came in, we did speak for a while, especially that initial result, because the gene that they had to differentiate between was one that was you know for a variety of cancers. So that counseling, that remember I think we somebody, there was anxiety on that word cloud. That 48 hours that I had to wait, or 3 or 4 days that I had to wait between that blood test and the result was very anxious time because it could have really changed my life. So finding out I could have passed something to my children, absolutely. That's the last thing we want to do. Do I have all the family history information I need? What if you are adopted? See, and that's where I'm not adopted, but I don't have a lot of my family history information. So the one thing that affected that was having to pay for the testing. For me, again, I thought it was worth it. So that's something that, you really have to think about if you are adopted. Is that something that you want to just be aware of? Anyone else have want to share their concerns? All right. Well, I want to thank you for participating. Um, and now let me take this out. There we go. And now if anyone has any questions, what we can do since Brianna's not here, we can share our questions with the genetic counselors in the Hope uh in the Life Center. And then that way we can put the answers in Mighty Networks. Sarah, do we have questions?
I know Bonnie asked a question earlier. She asked
Oh, okay.
if one parent has a genetic mutation, how likely will that be passed on to their children?
And we saw in Brianna's presentation that there's actually a 50% chance.
Evelyn, I have a question. I don't know if this can go to the geneticist. This is Donna O'Mara from VHA. A number of people that I've come across are concerned about their DNA information being out in the world, so to speak. And I was wondering if the geneticists find that, or if by the time the geneticists speak to them, the person has already agreed to get tested. So I'm just wondering if that's a thing. So for those people diagnosed with, let's say, a breast cancer at an early age, and it would be beneficial for their family, to know about, the geneticists of it. They're concerned about genetic testing to be out there.
I
So,
would imagine the genetic testing would also fall under HIPAA.
mhm,
So if they're having other tests done that
for
fall,
the tumor anyway, yes.
right, it should, I'm guessing here,
Hmm.
um, but I would think that would all fall under HIPAA, where
Right.
those things cannot be shared.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Because with our veteran population, they're always very concerned about these type of tests, and understandably so with things that have happened. So anyway, so I was just wondering if that was a thing in the private
Yeah,
sector as well.
yeah.
Okay.
Monica has her hand up. Monica, you can unmute if you'd like.
Hi. So I have put in the chat like the concern would be like not knowing all of your family history, you know, and I know that sometimes we're not as communicative with our family members around asking specific questions, right? And I'm wondering if there is some kind of tool that you all might have or suggest that can start the conversation around collecting family history. So even if you're not as prepared for genetic counseling and testing, you just sort of know, right? You know that information for yourself. So is there any suggestion on a tool that can be used to have conversations around family history?
I am not familiar, Monica, but what we can do is we can ask that question of the genetic counselors at the Cancer Institute.
Yeah, I can follow up for you. I know Brianna left a few resources as well, so I'll post those in the Mighty Networks and I'll look through them as well. But I'm sure she has some sort of guide to help talk about this since genetic counselors do a lot more than test results.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And I know Dee just shared a resource. So she said Okra offers free genetic testing from Color Health to women at risk for ovarian cancer. So she put that in the chat, and I will also share that after in the Mighty Networks.
Thank you, Dee.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, Katie, Monica sent you a link.
Yep, I just thumbs up. Put a thumbs up there. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Don't be shy. We might not be able to answer it, but at least we can ask for you. All right, then let's go to the post test.
All right, I can read them too while people answer. So the first question, everyone inherits genes that protect against cancer, but mutations in these genes can increase a person's risk of developing cancer. True or false? The second question, certain patterns in family history, such as multiple related cancers on the same side, early diagnosis, or rare cancer types may suggest an inherited cancer risk. True or false? And then the third question, genetic counselors only explain test results. True or false?
All right, we'll give it another minute or so. I've got about 50-some% participated. I like to get up to 75. So let's give it like another minute or so for people to answer. Come on. I know there's a few of you in here that are still working on it. All right, let's go ahead and end it and share the results. Sarah, did you want to?
Yeah, does the next slide have I mean, I know the answers, but so the first one is true. I think everybody got that correct. Second one is true. I know
Yes,
Brianna
it
talked to,
does.
okay. I know Brianna went over this as well, that having multiple related cancers on the same side of your family, early diagnoses, or just rare cancer types can suggest an inherited cancer risk. And the third one is actually false because she explained the list of her duties as a genetic counselor, and she goes beyond explaining the test results, but also how to manage resources, etc. All right, we have NJ Seed. They offer free cancer screenings in all 21 counties of New Jersey. I'm forgetting the exact kind, but breast, cervical, colorectal, prostate. I put their phone number and links in the chat as well, but this will all be posted on the Mighty Networks if you need to look at it later. The evaluation is also in the chat, so thank you for attending today's session. Let us know how we did. You can also scan the QR code to let us know how we did. And then our Mighty Networks community, everything gets posted here. So will the resources, so will Brianna's contact information. So if you have any more questions, definitely look there. We can definitely get them answered for you too. If you want to just type them in there, I'll follow up for you. I'm going to follow up on Monica's question as well, so I can post that there. And join us next month. We're doing a session on thyroid cancer. We're having a doctor from the Cancer Institute come and talk about thyroid cancer as well as her research with the specific treatment that she's doing. So it'll be a really interesting session, something that we haven't covered before. I think that's all. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a very interesting and informational session. Thank you, Evelyn, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you, everyone.